A second just so. Idleness leads to humps. Episode 9. It is that time to prep for your day, motivate yourself to pick up around the house, or wind down for some much needed R&R. I'm Lacey, and welcome to Let's Get Foxy, where we enjoy classic literature and have discussions about these stories, history, and more. First things first, happy Father's Day to all the fathers, stepfathers, father figures, pet fathers, etc., etc. Happy Father's Day, everybody. So, in honor of Father's Day, we are going to be continuing with our Just So Stories by Rudyard Kipling. And just to recap, Just So Stories was published in 1902. It joined Project Gutenberg in 2001 and was most recently updated in 2019. Today's story is How the Camel Got His Hump. Now, for today's topic, in honor of our fathers, we are going to be discussing Rudyard Kipling's life, specifically a little bit about his childhood, and then focusing on his passion as a father. Rudyard Kipling, he actually had a very hard childhood. He was born on December 30th, 1865 in Bombay, which is modern-day Mumbai, India. He actually had a happy childhood during his time in India. And when I was researching, there was one source that said that he left at the age of 6, which was the Britannica, whereas other sources, including the Kipling Society, said that he left at the age of 5. So at the age of 5, he was sent away back to England for his education. Now, I know that today that seems like a very strange occurrence to be sending your child to a whole other country. Today, people still send their children away for boarding school or specialized schools, but you don't typically hear about them being sent away to a whole other country. Well, back then, especially in British colonies, the families would raise their children to about the age of 5 or so, and then they would send their children back to England for education, because England was at the forefront of education during this time, and it was very important to them that their children get the best education possible. Now, when I say this, in the case of Kipling, they sent both him and his sister back to England, and yet the parents stayed in India, so they were sent to stay by themselves. So they were actually sent to a foster home located in South Sea. And we're not going to dig too deeply today because we're going to be discussing one of his later stories. Well, a different story, not later per se. But we're going to be discussing another one of his stories where he uses this time of his life as inspiration. And I worry that you guys will get sick of me saying the same information over and over. So, when he stayed at this place, it didn't start off being necessarily a very negative thing. It was very strict. He actually described the husband as the kind captain and was quite attached to him. Well, the man died, and he was left with the wife and her son. And the wife was incredibly strict, and in fact, I would say that she was actually abusive based off of the information that I found. And he was abused during his time with them. Now, some years pass, and at the age of 12, his mother came to visit. And when she went to give him a hug, he actually ducked because he thought he was going to be hit. And so she discovered that he had been mistreated, and she got him out of that situation immediately. And then she sent him away to boarding school. And we'll discuss boarding school and all of that again later because it comes into play with yet another one of his stories. So, again, time passes, and in 1882, he returned to India. He moved back to work as a reporter in Lahore, which is where his parents were living. Now, I know I can't be the only one who was like, Lahore, and be like, did she say that wrong? Did she not do her homework? I did my homework, and I did not say that wrong. Because in my experience, Lahore is part of Pakistan, which is where it is in modern times. So I did some research. I found out that Lahore was actually part of British India from 1849 to 1947, and in 1947 it became part of modern-day Pakistan. Now, it's still very cool to me that it was actually part of British India for nearly 100 years. That's just really cool because, well, geography and history kind of failed me where I was growing up because I wasn't aware of that. So I thought I would share that with you. So he lived there for a few years, where he worked as a reporter and he published some poems and stories during this time period. He returned to England in 1889. In 1892, he married Carrie Balestier. Now, Carrie was the sister of his friend Walcott Balestier. And so they went on their honeymoon and they did some traveling before they moved back to Brattleboro, Vermont, to live in Carrie's family home. This is where his daughters Josephine and Elsie were born. In 1896, he actually quarreled with his brother-in-law and returned to England, where they moved to Sussex. And during this time frame, he wrote Just So stories and some other tales that we're very familiar with for his children as bedtime stories. He was an incredibly devoted father. Now, why are they called Just So stories? I know that the name has always stood out for me when I would hear them as a child. So they were called Just So stories because his daughter Josephine loved them, and they had to be told just so. And she would actually correct him if there were any errors made. She would go out of her way to tease him, and she would giggle, and she got great joy because it had to be told in that precise way. That's why when you hear them, he uses all of the specific wording, like, oh, my beloved, all these different things. It's because that was what his kids loved, what Josephine loved. In 1899, Kipling and his family traveled back to visit the United States, and the family actually became sick on that voyage. When they reached land, they actually got even sicker. Kipling and Josephine, they actually ended up developing pneumonia. They got it the worst out of the entire family. And during this time, Kipling nearly died. In fact, they were so sure he was going to pass, they had actually begun writing his obituary. You know, you can't submit it until a person actually dies because you need to have the date that they pass. But they had it in the process of being written, mostly drafted, waiting for this man to pass away. And poor sweet Josephine, she was so sick. Well, when I watched the documentary about Kipling's life, it talked about how her final words before she slipped into a coma were for her father, that she loved him. And she ended up passing away on March 6th. And at that time, Kipling had started to turn things around. He was starting to get better. And so his family and the doctors decided not to tell him. They believed that the news of losing Josephine would kill him, that he would lose the will to live. So he wasn't told for weeks during his recovery. They actually lied to him because he would ask how his Josephine was doing and his Elsie. He would ask how his daughters were doing. And they would tell him that Josephine was fine, that she would ask for him, and that she was doing better. And when he found out the truth, it changed him as a person. In the records that I found, they said that he became a much harder man. It shattered him as a person. I don't know about you guys or any other parents, but I don't know if I could have been strong enough to share something that my son loved so much that I created for him. That pain of losing a child, many of us would take the Just So stories and the other works and we would just throw it in a cupboard. You know, we would lock it away, we would burn it, something. Kipling was a stronger man, or maybe it was because it helped him to cope with the loss. Maybe it helped him to grieve. But instead of boxing away Just So stories, he still told them to his surviving children. They were still part of their nighttime routine. And he published them exactly the way that Josephine loved them and gave them the name Just So because they had to be said Just so. So, I know that you guys can probably hear that I'm getting a little choked up. It doesn't matter how many times I talk about this or read it gets me all in the feels. But stay tuned for after how the camel got his hump, because we're going to learn more about camels, and we're going to discuss the lesson that Kipling presents in this story. Enjoy! Before our book reading begins, I just wanted to take a minute to say this book is a snapshot of the past. This book may contain negative views and/or treatment of people and cultures. This was wrong then, and it is wrong now. Instead of blacklisting these novels, let's recognize the influence and learn from it. For as the philosopher George Santayana said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Let's learn from the past to create a more inclusive future together. How the Camel Got His Hump. Now, this is the next tale, and it tells how the camel got his big hump. In the beginning of years, when the world was so new and all, and the animals were just beginning to work for man, there was a camel, and he lived in the middle of a howling desert because he did not want to work. And besides, he was a howler himself. So he ate sticks and thorns and tamarisks and milkweed and prickles, most excruciating idle. And when anybody spoke to him, he said, "Humph!" Just humph, and no more. Presently the horse came to him on Monday morning, with a saddle on his back and a bit in his mouth, and said, "Camel, oh camel, come out and trot like the rest of us." "Humph!" said the camel, and the horse went away and told the man. Presently the dog came to him with a stick in his mouth, and said, "Camel, oh camel, come and fetch and carry like the rest of us." "Humph!" said the camel, and the dog went away and told the man. Presently the ox came to him with the yoke on his neck and said, "Camel, oh camel, come and plow like the rest of us." "Humph!" said the camel, and the ox went away and told the man. At the end of the day the man called the horse, the dog, and the ox together and said, "303, I'm very sorry for you, with the world so new and all, but that humph thing in the desert won't work, or he would have been here by now, so I'm going to leave him alone, and you must work double time to make up for it." That made the three very angry, with the world so new and all. And they held a palaver, and an indaba, and a panchayat, and a powwow on the edge of the desert, and the camel came chewing on milkweed, most excruciating idle, and laughed at them. Then he said, "Humph!" and went away again. Presently there came along the djinn in charge of all deserts, rolling in a cloud of dust. Djinns always travel that way, because it is magic. And he stopped to palaver and powwow with the three. "Djinn of all deserts," said the horse, "is it right for any one to be idle with the world so new and all?" "Certainly not," said the djinn. "Well," said the horse, "there's a thing in the middle of your howling desert, and he's a howler himself, with a long neck and long legs, and he hasn't done a stroke of work since Monday morning. He won't trot." "Whew!" said the djinn, whistling. "That's my camel for all the gold in Arabia. What does he say about it?" "He says humph," said the dog, "and he won't fetch and carry." "Does he say anything else?" "Only humph, and he won't plow," said the ox. "Very good," said the djinn. "I'll humph him if you will kindly wait a minute." The djinn rolled himself up in his dust cloak, and took a bearing across the desert, and found the camel most excruciatingly idle, looking at his own reflection in a pool of water. "My long and bubbling friend," said the djinn, "what's this I hear of your doing no work with the world so new and all?" "Humph!" said the camel. The djinn sat down with his chin in his hand, and began to think a great magic, while the camel looked at his own reflection in the pool of water. "You've given the three extra work ever since Monday morning, all on account of your excruciating idleness," said the djinn, and he went on, thinking magics with his chin in his hand. "Humph!" said the camel. "I wouldn't say that again if I were you," said the djinn. "You might say it once too often. Bubbles, I want you to work." And the camel said, "Humph!" again, but no sooner had he said it than he saw his back that he was so proud of, puffing up and puffing up. into a great big lolloping hump. "Did you see that?" said the gin. "That's your very own hump that you've brought upon your very own self by not working. Today is Thursday, and you've done no work since Monday when the work began. Now you are going to work." "How can I," said the camel, "with this hump on my back?" "That's made a purpose," said the gin, "all because you missed those 3 days. You will be able to work now for 3 days without eating, because you can live on your hump. And don't you ever say I never did anything for you. Come out of the desert and go to the 3 and behave. Hump yourself." And the camel humped himself, hump and all, and went away to join the 3. And from that day to this, the camel always wears a hump. We call it a hump now, not to hurt his feelings. But he has never yet caught up with the 3 days that he missed at the beginning of the world, and he has never yet learned how to behave. The camel's hump is an ugly lump, which well you may see at the zoo, but uglier yet is the hump we get from having too little to do. Kiddies and grown-ups too. If we haven't enough to do, we get the hump, Camellia's hump, the hump that is black and blue. We climb out of bed with a frowsly head and a gnarly-yarly voice. We shiver and scowl and we grunt and we growl at our bath and our boots and our toys. And there ought to be a corner for me, and I know there is one for you. When we get the hump, Camellia's hump, the hump that is black and blue. The cure for this ill is not to sit still, or frowst with a book by the fire, but to take a large hoe and a shovel also, and dig till you gently perspire. And then you will find that the sun and the wind and the gin of the garden too have lifted the hump, that horrible hump, the hump that is black and blue. I get it as well as you. If I haven't enough to do, we all get hump, Camellia's hump, kiddies and grown-ups too. Tell me I'm not the only one who enjoys the ditties that Kipling includes in his stories. I love them, they just bring me so much joy. So, in How the Camel Got His Hump, we learn that in a second just so, idleness leads to humps. So Kipling is trying to warn children about the consequences of being idle. He states that idleness is going to cause a hump to form. Now, how do humps actually form? Well, it can be partly due to idleness, because if you're not moving properly and you're holding your muscles incorrectly for so long, that can create bad posture. And so you can get kind of a hump from slouching. You've trained your muscles to hold your body in that position, and so now you have a hump. Now, there's also genetics where you can develop what is known as the dowager's hump. And again, exercise can help to reduce that a little bit, but it is genetic. So, he wants to make sure that children know that laziness has consequences. That is why the djinn curses the camel, because he went and he tried to talk to the camel about the importance of taking up his share of the work. And the camel just shrugged him off. He just humphed his way through it. And that had a consequence. And he wanted to make it in a fun way so that children weren't, well, I'm sure that children were a little worried about developing a hump, but he tried to make it fun so that it wasn't something that was just terrifying. And so they learned that how do you avoid a hump? You get out, you do the work, you grab a hoe. He also exhibits the importance of teamwork because the dog, the horse, and the ox, they were all working together. They all reached out to help the camel, and the camel turned it down. And they, talked to him. They had their powwow, and the camel went on his way. He humphed and went on his way. And so the djinn came and ended up talking with them. And so it shows that not only does laziness have consequences, and that it's better to do your share of the work, but it also shows that you can work together as a team to rectify problems, which I think is very important in today's world because I don't know about you guys, but there have been plenty of jobs that I've worked where your supervisor is like, oh, figure it out, instead of collaborating and helping to find a better solution that would solve the problem from occurring and being able to be better served for the entire company. It also is a fun way to give children these lessons by focusing on what they call the camel's folly. It's just a fun little way of doing it. Now, why do camels have humps? So, in my research, I learned that there are two kinds of camels: the Bactrian, which are the two humped camels, and the dromedary, which have one hump. Now, what do they have in common? Why are there different humps? So, both types of camels can go many days without food or water. Now, growing up, there was the myth that a camel's hump held water. That's why they could go so long without water. Well, in fact, what a hump is it stores fat for energy. So, kind of like when we build a little bit extra around the middle, we're storing that fat for later for energy. They do the exact same thing with their hump. In the environment where the camels live, it is actually crucial that when they eat, they can eat a great amount or drink a great amount at a time and then store that energy, because as they're crossing, they're not necessarily going to find food again soon. So it helps them to survive in their environment. Or in the case of the gin, it allows a camel to work for an extra 3 days since they're behind. They're actually known to go months without water. They actually evolved to conserve water. So, how did they evolve to conserve water? They actually urinate and sweat in very small amounts, and they actually produce dry feces. And I don't know about you guys, but that just sounds very painful for me. But they're adapted to do that. They are omnivorous animals, which means that they eat plants and other animals. In fact, have been known to eat rope, canvas, and carcasses when they don't have the food of their choice available. Back to those humps. So the humps, when a camel is well fed, they stand upright. And if they have gone without for some time or they've been traveling, their humps will actually deflate or sag. And that's one way that camel owners can judge if their animal is getting enough food, or if they're out in the desert crossing, they can be like, okay, we need to get something for my camel sooner rather than later. They are known as artiodactyls. And what that means is the of the animal is distributed evenly across the toes. And yes, camels actually have toes. I know that the shape of the foot makes you think, oh, it's like a cloven hoof. It is not. It is actual toes. And so what that does is that allows them to spread their weight evenly across their feet, which allows them to traverse sand and the rough terrain without falling. It makes them a much more adept, so they're not sinking into the sand. Both kinds of camels, Bactrian and dromedary, they can run up to 40 miles per hour. So we are now going to focus on the two kinds of camels. So I know that our camel from the story is a dromedary, but we're going to start with the Bactrian, the two-humped camel. So there's actually two different breeds, and they call them wild and domestic. Their habitat range is considered Eurasia, so from Ukraine to the southern Middle East to the east of Mongolia are where you can find these camels. So if you look at the domestic Bactrian camel, their humps are larger and they're more cylindrical, and they have a more robust body, heavier legs, and rounded skulls compared to their wild counterparts. So the wild Bactrian camel, their humps are more pyramid shaped. They're actually a smaller build, and so they are a much lighter camel, and their skulls are actually flat. And so for the camels, because winter is a thing for them, they both grow these long woolen coats so that they can survive the winter, can survive the cold. And so that long coat is what is used in textiles and fibers. Now, the wild Bactrian camel is actually on the endangered species list. And the wild camel, they are treated as either feral runaways and a subspecies of the domesticated. So there's the similarities, and the differences. So if you remember the difference in skulls, that explains why, is they are technically a subspecies of each other. Now, domestic Bactrian camels, they have healthy populations because they're being cared for by people. And so they are not on the endangered species list. Now, the dromedary camel is also known as the Arabian camels, the one-humped camel. These are only domestic. The wild dromedary camel, they're extinct. They were driven to extinction. However, there is a feral population of dromedary camel in Australia. How cool! So, dromedary camels were actually brought over to Australia in the 19th century, and I don't know if they were set free or if they got loose, but they've actually got a wild camel population over there in Australia. And by wild, I mean a feral population. Now, the dromedary camel are longer legged and slimmer than the Bactrian. So not only do they have one hump, but they are taller and slimmer. Now, before we say goodbye, don't forget to hit that like button to find me again later. Share with a friend that you think would be interested. And if you want to receive episodes first, my patrons get access first on Patreon. But I am so glad that we could spend the time today. And don't forget, be kind. Have a fantastic rest of your day, guys. Talk to you later.